Welcome to Making IT Work, Deep Creek Center's blog for IT professionals committed to using best practices to provide exceptional value for their business clients.
Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to begin the next step on the customer journey. I hope that you've already had the chance to hear our discussion about exploration. And obviously, that has to happen before we can have engagement between a customer and a potential service provider. In today's blog, we're going to talk a little bit about the engage aspect of the journey. And this is a big enough aspect of the journey that we're actually going to break this into a number of different parts. Now, you'll remember when we were talking originally about the customer journey, we suggested that there were a lot of different parts to the journey, and it's important to understand both from the customer's perspective and from the service provider's perspective what these interactions look like, what their motivations are, and how we help foster successful relationships with our customers and our service providers in turn. So today, again, we're going to dig into the idea of creating an engagement between a supplier or partner and some customer. So right away, when we start thinking about engaging with a potential partner, keeping in mind that we haven't made any kind of offers yet, because we really don't know enough yet to be able to describe how we might be able to help solve the customer's issues. It all begins with fundamental transparency. Right? The supplier wants to know how we are going to engage with them, and we in turn with our customers downstream and vice versa. And they want to understand in a fundamental way and build a structure of trust with us. Ultimately, we want to use the engagement model to understand our customer, to understand something about their preferences, their backgrounds, their experience, and our experience, and how we might be able to help solve certain kinds of problems for them. Ultimately, either from the customer's perspective or from the service provider's perspective, we want to think about the relationship in the context of how it's going to help us do certain things that we want. What is the nature of the customer's outcomes? How are we going to be able to facilitate those through provisioning of certain types of services? What are the outcomes that we as a service provider are seeking to make? Generally, revenue, profit, and market share of some kind, but in other cases, certain other business objectives that we might have. How do we work together with our customers to best optimize their risk, to be able to assure effective compliance with any legal, regulatory, or other constraints they might face? And how do we, in turn, provide a level of assurance that us as a service provider will be able to uphold those risk and compliance requirements? Ultimately, both the customer and the service provider are interested in optimizing their resources and being able to effectively minimize their costs while getting the results that they were trying to. So eventually, building an effective relationship becomes a balancing act of understanding the different aspects of value from each of the different perspectives. Understanding the desired business outcomes they're trying to achieve, understanding their preferences and how they achieve those outcomes, and various perceptions of quality and appropriate fit for the solutions in question. The next key piece of this, of course, is figuring out how we're going to work together and do effective collaboration and establish effective communications between the customer and the service provider. As always, this begins with listening and having very effective listening skills. Now, unfortunately, lots of people don't really take formal listening training, and so they may not know a lot about different listening modes and how to be an effective listener. Right? A lot of listening is done from what we call an internal perspective. I'm listening for the key information I want to understand, and I'm listening for the opportunity to respond and position my solution, let's say, instead of taking the time to fully understand the customer's needs and wishes before then turning to engage in backward. A focused listener is listening much more intently, but at the same time is really, again, trying to figure out how and what the different aspects of the service should be, what the nature of a service level agreement might look like, and they're thinking in terms of response. So as the customer is describing their needs, we're thinking about how we're going to respond to that to effectively provide an effective solution. As we work our way toward more global listening, we may be listening for things that aren't being said, but that really are present in the customer's concerns or the customer's preferences. We're observing and using all of our senses, taking into account body language and tone of voice, as well as the words our customers are using, and ultimately trying to have a more complete understanding of the customer's priorities, the customer's preferences, and then and only then trying to work together with our stakeholders to try to figure out how we might most effectively solve that customer's problems. One other key aspect of building effective solution teams, of course, is having a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of capabilities. Ultimately, those diverse teams bring different strengths and produce a higher value result in the medium term for your client as well. Keeping that in mind, we need to understand some things that diverse teams create for us. There may be various cultural differences in expectations and how various activities are carried out. We may have people working across many different time zones, and we need to think about things like shared working hours, how the teams will effectively operate as teams to collaborate and communicate together. Are there seasonal aspects to how the work gets done, where certain cultures in certain parts of the world may take large parts of the month of August off for vacation? And ultimately, how do we continue to provide a quality service while some of those team members may be unavailable? And lastly, we want to understand something about our organizational cultures and the organizational cultures of our customer, and how we help facilitate outcomes for them, and in turn, how we collaborate effectively to have high-performing working teams. In our next blog, we're going to talk more extensively about the idea of service relationship types, but we'll introduce the concept very briefly now. Taken from the business analysis body of knowledge, as well as the business relationship management programs, service relationships come in various kinds. A basic relationship might include various types of ad hoc responses, or what we often think of as an order-taker type relationship, where somebody provides me an order and I fulfill the order. Right? This doesn't obviously create a tremendous amount of strategic benefit or a particularly meaningful amount of differentiation, which may create opportunities for competitors to differentiate themselves and take that business away from you. As organizations mature more, we work toward what we might think of as a more collaborative relationship. The collaborative relationship really being reflected in their perception of us as a service provider and not just a provisioner of things, and potentially as a trusted advisor that they'll bring into the center circle to talk about more strategic, more important issues that are differentiators for them as a provider to their customers. Ultimately, what we're probably going to try to want to achieve is something that looks like a true partnership, where we are engaging with the customer in a very fundamental way to help them drive strategic benefits to their organization and to their customers, and to be part of their strategic value to their stakeholders upstream and downstream. In the next blog, we'll explore each of these in more depth, and we'll talk a little bit about when it's appropriate to have which kinds of relationships, and in turn, what some of the challenges each one of those may bring in terms of our levels of effort, our levels of engagement, and so forth.
Thank you for joining us today. Deep Creek Center provides consulting and training for businesses around the world. For more information, visit deepcreekcenter.com.